Today's session is about neighbourhood management, which is about keeping the neighbourhood and communal areas around residents' homes clean and safe. Today, I've got Professor Anne Power from the LSE with us, as well as Anne Baker, Director of Housing Corporate Services from Poplar Harker. So can I ask Dr. Power and to give a brief introduction of who they are and what they do? Anne?
Hi, I'm Anne Power. I work at the LSE. I'm also chair of the National Communities Resource Centre at Trafford Hall near Chester, and I'm a long-term advocate and actual organiser of neighbourhood management. And at LSE, I'm responsible for a little research group called LSE Housing and Communities, and we've done several projects on neighbourhood management, including at the moment evaluating a neighbourhood management project on the Lancaster West estate, where the Grenfell Tower is located.
Thank you, Anne. Andrea?
Hello, everyone. I'm Andrea Baker. You'll hear more about Poplar Harker later, but I've been working in housing for far too many years, and I've been at Harker for 15 of them.
Thank you very much. Now, this programme is part of the series of programmes to as a catalyst for change in social housing. And it's really providing knowledge, guidance, and assistance and training for residents on how to really, be part of their neighbourhood discussions and to make sure that their voices are also heard. Anne, can I ask you to start? And
Okay.
then, thank you.
All right. So it's really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'll do my best to give a few little ideas about neighbourhood management. So we start with what is neighbourhood management. And in order to understand neighbourhood management, we need to understand neighbourhoods. Well, neighbourhoods are areas with natural boundaries, very often a road or sometimes a river or sometimes an open space. And it's where residents within that area share common services and they share the local environment. And the staff who work in those local services are there to respond to residents' needs. A lot happens in neighbourhoods. A lot happens in an informal way as well as a formal way, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. So how the neighbourhood is, how it's made up and what its condition is, always requires some kind of coordination and focus. If we just think of refuse collection and street cleaning and the maintenance of communal areas, just those three activities, which are all usually organised separately, are actually all overlapping. And this coordination and focus on making an area work is what neighbourhood management is about. And without neighbourhood management, things are much, much more difficult. Why do we need it? Well, we need it because many areas are run down and have very poor local environments. And unless somebody does something about it, those areas just gradually tip and slide. And because there are too few internal resources and services aren't good enough, for example, a shortage of caretakers, without something like neighbourhood management, they simply don't work. And this is particularly true in areas of rented housing. And that's because tenants literally do not have the right or the authority or the jurisdiction to actually take care of local conditions. I mean, obviously they can help, but they can't actually organise or deliver them, which is very different from an owner-occupied area, which I'll mention in a little while. So neighbourhood management, if it's got decent leadership, can improve services by bringing residents together, by raising standards, and by making the area just more viable. I mean, communities don't work in areas that are very decayed and neglected. I think the Marmot review of health disparities showed that poor neighbourhoods have very bad environmental conditions and therefore very bad social conditions, and therefore they just don't work. So it's really, really important to get that right. And one of the remarkable things about neighbourhood management, which I'll come on to, is that it does help to compensate for deprivation and for a shortage of material resources, because the energy input of local staff is hugely valuable. It's worth a lot of what otherwise would be wasted money. And it raises standards while generating a lot of satisfaction, both among staff and among tenants. So how did neighbourhood management arise? Where did this idea come from? Well, it basically arose because social landlords own concentrated areas of housing, and those concentrated areas of housing are, by definition, concentrated areas of poverty. And if there isn't local management of those concentrated areas, then conditions do deteriorate. And one of the things that happened in the 1980s, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember it, was the emergence of difficult to let estates. Council estates became so badly managed that people who were in desperate housing conditions just wouldn't move to them. So we had this ridiculous situation of housing need and empty property. It seems hard to believe today, but it's true. And so basically, having instituted local housing management, which I was very much part and parcel of through a government programme called the Priority Estates Project, basically local housing management evolved into neighbourhood management. It was effectively neighbourhood management because you couldn't actually make the housing work without making the community work. You couldn't make the repairs to a property work if you didn't make the environment decent. So what are the core aims of neighbourhood management? Well, first of all, its main aim is to coordinate services on the ground in order to make it work better and improve conditions. And its whole focus is on what I call hands-on ground level action. It's not on pressing computer buttons. It's not on calling call centres. It's on people on the ground actually doing stuff that makes the area work. And it also has a huge preventive purpose. But then it also has the main purpose of tackling problems when they arise. So what methods are used by neighbourhood managers? Well, they're very varied. I mean, people sort of invent them as they go along. But there's one core to neighbourhood management, which is a team of housing staff, locally based, and working with other services wherever they can, such as the police. Well, when we worked on Tulse Hill in Brixton in the 1980s, without the police, we literally couldn't have done it. And when I say the police, I mean the beat policeman who belonged to that estate and who was known by the residents, which was just the most fantastic benefit. So when the Brixton riots happened, the Tulse Hill estate completely escaped as a result of having a completely different relationship with the police through local management. The same applies to health. So on Broadwater Farm, for example, which is one of the best neighbourhood management examples, they managed to persuade the health service to actually move into an integrated service on the estate. It applies to youth services, it applies to community centres, you name it. So neighbourhood management can be very, very diverse. But the crucial thing is that there must be a neighbourhood manager or an estate manager to pull it all together. And one of the interesting things we discovered when we did our report on neighbourhood management is that this approach also works for town centres and for shopping centres. And so quite a lot of very rundown town centres have been reversed through the equivalent of neighbourhood management. It's actually called town centre management. I just thought I'd throw that in because it is an interesting extra. So what's the impact of local neighbourhood management? First of all, it's locally based, it has full-time staff, and they have a direct impact on conditions. Because they're visible, they've got nowhere to hide. And so they've got no choice but to actually do their jobs. They can't escape from the eyes of residents because they're supposed to be there. And their responsibilities actually force them to do their job properly. But the other thing about neighbourhood management with its impact is that it does give residents far more confidence because they can actually see who's supposed to be helping them. They can actually see where the repairs team is. They can see where the caretakers are. And so it gives them access to people who they know can help them get things done. It completely transforms residents' attitudes. And one of the things that we found, I mean, we've done an evaluation of how residents can get help. For example, when they're dealing with debt, it costs 4p to do an IT bit of an answer to somebody's debt problem. It costs 40p to do a phone call, and it costs £400 to do a face-to-face actual direct help. And I think to be very honest, that price reflects the value. because both staff and residents hugely value the face-to-face contact. And I'll come on in a minute to how you can afford that. So what are the barriers to neighbourhood management? If it's so brilliant, why isn't it done everywhere? Well, the main barriers are, first of all, bureaucracy. So the hierarchy of a sizable organisation, whether it's a housing association or a local authority. I can't think of who else might be responsible for an area or a neighbourhood. Secondly, the cost. No employer these days ever wants to put more feet on the ground. They immediately say, no, it's too expensive, without even thinking about what the value of that extra person's contribution would be. Is extra stuff is a burden. And then thirdly, it takes a lot of energy for staff to actually be on the ground and be exposed to residents and have to be running around after practical problems all the time. It's very satisfying to actually get those problems sorted, but you still have to put in the effort. So you've got three big barriers, but I argue that all of those barriers can actually be overcome, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But before I do that, I thought it would be quite good to describe what good looks like. So good neighbourhood management looks like the successful models that we've got, and we've got a few very successful ones. I already mentioned Broadwood Farm, which was a notorious estate, and there was a very terrible riot there in 1985 where a police officer was killed. I'm so sorry. I've had a cold for the last 2 weeks. And it's been a neighbourhood management model now for 35 years. It's managed to survive the test of time. The Lancaster West estate, where we're currently doing an evaluation, is another good example, because the Lancaster West estate is where the Grenfell Tower is, and there was every reason to try and do something about how it was run. And they set up a neighbourhood management team, which is actually proving very successful. And then there are lots of tenant management organisations all around the country. So, for example, there was a very old First World War estate in Islington called Addington Mansions in Highbury, which the council wanted to demolish, but it found it so hard to move the tenants, to rehouse the tenants, because they'd only put very poor and very difficult tenants there, that they decided they couldn't demolish it. So guess what? They decided to renovate the estate and put in place, it's only quite a small estate, about 200 units, put in place effectively neighbourhood management, which became a tenant management organisation with an on-site caretaker and incredibly good management. And to this day, I walk past it with pride, because that estate was for the birds. And actually with the same residents, the ones who were classed as too difficult to house anywhere else, and a very good caretaker and very good neighbourhood management, it's a very successful estate. Another example, rather similar, is the Bloomsbury estate in Birmingham, which I won't go into the details of, or I'm going to run out of time, which I don't want to do. So why is neighbourhood necessary, and where? Well, it's necessary in all areas of concentrated property, all areas of social housing estates, because they're always poor, and all areas with a high proportion of renting, even if it's got lots of private renting. That's because landlords of rented property are very, very rarely residents of the areas that they're responsible for. So you don't find the CEO of Clarion, for example, housing association, living on a Clarion estate. I don't know if Steve Stride lives in a Poplar Harker property, but I somehow suspect that he doesn't. Whereas in an owner-occupied area, although owner-occupiers sometimes aren't very high income, they do live in the area that they own, and their ownership stake does make quite a big difference. So the areas of rented housing that are up for neighbourhood management lack the resources and the community capital to address all of these social problems and physical problems that amount in rented housing. And the staff working in these areas also need support. It's very difficult for them to do what has to be done without a wider structure to fit into, and without someone to actually help them cope, and also without someone to pull it all together and make it all work, which is what neighbourhood management does. So how does success look? Well, a successful neighbourhood management project brings all the concentrated resources of time and energy from all of those locally based staff to an area that needs extra things. So if we take the average number of staff that a landlord employs to run social housing, it's basically 1 employee for every 30 properties. So on an estate of 1,000 units, there will be 30 designated staff who should be based on that estate. That will give you 10 caretakers. It'll give you 3 estate officers. It'll give you a neighbourhood manager. It'll give you a community support officer. It'll give you a repairs team of about 8 people and quite a few others. So there's a huge amount of slack in the system that's tied up with people gazing at computers all the time and answering call centres all the time and sitting in hierarchies, just telling somebody else which button to press. I mean, it really doesn't make sense the way we've tried to run housing over the last, well, many decades actually. So if we think about success, what does success do? First of all, it raises standards, it coordinates inputs, it motivates the local staff, and problems get sorted out because of it. It raises staff morale, because when staff sort a problem out, they are jubilant, literally. They kind of smile from ear to ear. And what do residents do? Well, residents smile from ear to ear too. So, I mean, it's basically a win-win situation. It's a win for staff and it's a win for residents. So how do we fund this, what seems like a very extravagant service? First of all, we redeploy staff from the centrally based systems. I've implied that there are far too many of them sitting, staring at computers. When I was teaching the housing staff and they went on placements, one of the placements they absolutely hated was going to a large housing association, because they would always be stuck behind a computer trying to sort out a rent arrears procedure that would please the audit service. And I mean, that wasn't why they'd gone into housing. And that wasn't what they were there for. So you can redeploy central staff, and a lot of staff will be very pleased with that. You actually reduce damage and crime because you've got local supervision on the ground. The staff become much more productive, and therefore you get more for your money. And you also save on housing costs because you stop disrepair and you stop damage. So giving the existing stock and existing communities priority, which is what neighbourhood management does, stops this slide towards we must regenerate this estate. I don't know if any of you saw the article about the Aylesbury estate and the tenant who's fighting like a dog, even though she's just been rehoused into a luxury flat rebuilt on the estate to try and shut her up. And she feels rightly her community has been destroyed. And in an estate that was structurally sound, okay, we wouldn't build the Aylesbury again today in the way it was built then, but it did exist, and it was 1,000 homes for local people, and it was a community. About 90% of the residents on the Aylesbury estate had a close relative living also on the estate. That's how amazing it was. And now you're going to get back about half the social housing, and the community's been lost. So what's my sort of overview conclusions? Well, first of all, neighbourhood management is extremely useful for tackling basic ground level conditions, and those arise in every single community. Secondly, it's absolutely vital in low-income neighbourhoods of rented housing, because there just isn't the capacity or the resources within those areas to tackle multiple local problems. Thirdly, if you have a locally based staff team, which is coordinated by a neighbourhood manager, then you can maintain conditions, you can build up confidence with residents, and you can develop a familiarity with local problems that makes them so much easier to solve. We all know that if you understand a problem, you can solve it more easily. And that's what neighbourhood management does. So neighbourhood management's tried, it's tested, it's affordable, and it actually saves money by protecting homes and communities. So guess what? I'm a big advocate.
Thank you, Anne. That was absolutely riveting, and I'm seeing people clapping because they've enjoyed your overview, Anne. Andrea, over to you.
Yeah, I suppose I will start. I'm going to share my screen and distract you all with pretty pictures. But I will start by saying it's been really difficult listening to you all and your experiences. What I'm going to describe where I work is a model. There are lots of different types of housing associations. We are one. We don't get it always right. We are certainly not perfect. But we like to think our intent is always good. And some of the things that you've already described are reasons why we are the way we are. So hopefully the technology works. And you can see a picture of a little bit of Canary Wharf in the background and lots of Poplar Harker stock in the foreground. I'm getting some thumbs up. Thank you, Eileen. So a little bit about Poplar Harker. I've just discovered that Professor Anne Power there was somewhat behind why we exist, because she had a conversation with our chief exec, Steve Stride, a very long time ago, extolling the virtues of neighbourhood management. And that obviously worked, because from our point of view, one of the things that we've always felt right from the beginning, we were a stock transfer in 1998 from Tower Hamlets Council, is that the growth should be about the best interests of residents, not the balance sheet. So actually, for us, we are in Poplar and a little bit of Bow, and now a little bit of the Isle of Dogs. But I can walk to any of our homes within 10 minutes. So if we get a call into our office, and I like to think that the people don't have to call into the office because we've always got people on the estates. But if something happens, we can be there immediately. And within that sort of 2 or 3 square miles, we've got 11 community hubs. So actually each of our estates has got a sort of heart, a Poplar Harker heart there, that residents run, that residents can use, that residents can congregate in and come together and talk about the good, the bad and the indifferent that we get up to. So we've got a really clear purpose, and the purpose was put together with our residents. So, you know, sometimes visions, purposes, mission statements, they're words, they look pretty on a nice document with lots of pretty pictures on it. But we actually take ours incredibly serious, and it's something that our board keeps reminding themselves of. So every time we go with a proposal, we've got to talk to our board about, one, what do residents think of this proposal, but also how does it fit in to the strategic purpose of the organisation? Why is it important that you do it? Now, housing management, you all know what good housing management looks like, so I'm actually not going to spend loads of time on that. But one of the things that I think is missing sometimes is a mutual trust. And actually it starts from the organisation not trusting residents to tell them what's going on, what's right, what's wrong, and how to do things. You know, I've been a housing professional for 15 years, so I know what it's like. Well, no, I don't know what it's like. I don't know what it's like to be on the estate at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know what it's like to be on the estate when the bins haven't been collected. I need some residents to tell me, but then I need to do something with that. There's no point gathering all of that information if you don't do anything with it. So these are our TSMs, so tenant satisfaction measures. We have just done our survey. Absolutely delighted to say that 86% of our tenants think that we're doing a good job, but 10%, and we've got 10,000 homes, 10% aren't happy with us. And we need to understand both. We need to understand what we're doing well, what's making the difference to that 86%, but also where are our gaps? And the only people that can tell us that are our residents. There's no point us looking at the qualitative data in the survey and coming back with an action plan. We need to go out again and really get under the skin about what would make that difference. So how do we do that? We have had resident empowerment and throughout our governance from day one. And again, I think it's something that we are very proud of, but we have to keep working at. It's not something that you just sort of put together, resident governance, and then walk away from it, all done, don't need to keep on evolving. We have got all sorts of different ways of residents being involved. And actually it's quite a challenge to collate all of that information into usable data. So we hear the words, you know, artificial intelligence, all the rest of it, but actually there's nothing better than having all of your staff as your eyes and your ears. And actually for us, a third of our staff are our residents. So we can't get away with doing anything that residents don't feel is in the best interests of the whole. So our formal resident governance has always had residents on our board. You know, if you're going to be serious about taking decisions in the best interest of residents, there has to be resident representation, but they have to be there because they've earned it. They've got to go through exactly the same recruitment process to have credibility that everybody else on the board does. So we spend a lot of time and a lot of money and I take a lot of effort in bringing residents through so that they are absolutely comfortable in that quite formal governance role. So sitting around the board table is definitely not an easy option. It isn't about you as an individual bringing your concerns to the board. It does put you sort of a bit in the headlights with your neighbours as well, who think that you've got a magic wand. But we do feel that it keeps us very grounded and accountable in a way that sometimes is missing in some of the bigger organisations. We're also really keen to make sure that we sustain that governance. So we've had a youth empowerment board for about 10 years. Our young people go through the same training, the same support, the same development. And I'm really proud to say that some of them have gone through our committees and been on our board. And again, that gives us a real flavour of what the future of our resident, what the needs are, what the aspirations are, but it also again grounds us in terms of saying, do you know what, Poplar Harker, my toilet didn't flush and it took you 3 weeks, and what was I supposed to do in the meantime? So it's that balance between the very strategic but also getting those on the ground day-to-day neighbourhood management things right. So really important one for us, and I'm sure the regulator will be looking at this, is one of you mentioned stigma, about that idea that how residents feel they are being treated, but also how they are being treated. One of the things I really hate to see is, we're sorry that you feel that way, as if it's sort of your problem, not our problem. So we've worked really hard again with residents to understand, what does respect mean for day-to-day interactions? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And how do we make sure that our staff feel it too, that it feels natural? It's not something that they've got a script that they're sort of trotting out, that it's a meaningful interaction with their residents. So we do a lot, but we don't do it ourselves. What we try to do is, as an anchor in the community, in the neighbourhood, is what do our residents need? So, and how can we make sure that happens? And we haven't got £2.5 billion to spend, sadly. But what we can do is try and pull that investment into our area and then target it at the areas that our residents need us to. So 2 of our proudest boasts, which sounds really strange for a housing association, is we've got a Docklands Light Railway station built, which means that residents are absolutely connected to the rest of London, to the centres where there are jobs. And also that we got, this sounds really mundane, but can't tell you what a difference it made. We got a zebra crossing across the A12. And just having that ability to feel part of the whole of the area, part of a larger neighbourhood, actually having some standing in the wider Tower Hamlets context, where we are fighting against the likes of Canary Wharf Group with their billions of pounds and a lot of social capital. We are right next door to the, if you remember the initial slide, the city, Stratford, which has gone mad through the Olympics. So actually fighting for our residents, but more so making sure that our residents are fighting for themselves, that they feel ownership, that they feel that they've got a stake in this, has been part and parcel of what we want to do. So a few examples. And these are the typical PR stuff that I'm sure that I'm now regretting putting these slides in, but hopefully they will give you a flavour of what we do. So St Paul's Way was one of our regeneration projects, and fantastically 109 homes. So that's about 3 times the amount of social homes as were there in the first place. But we also built a school, we built a nursery, we built a mosque. And you may say to yourselves, why on earth is a housing association building a school, building a nursery, building a mosque? Because from our point of view, our residents' point of view, this is what makes the difference in terms of neighbourhood and community. This is what makes it work. These are the things, this is the infrastructure that actually, if we only built the homes, there's no way that those other players, those other stakeholders, those all important statutory bodies would actually come to this area. So we make it part and parcel when we talk to residents about regeneration, and it is a hugely controversial area of our work. It can get very emotional, but we only ever do it where what we can achieve through regeneration is perfectly matches what our residents have told us they want. So another very controversial one at the moment is Aberfeldy. It's in phases. We've already built 1,000 new homes. Again, there's a health centre, there is faith centre, there is community centre, there's a pub, a community pub, which is absolutely incredible in an area where Tower Hamlets were losing pubs, and our residents said, actually, we miss that social centre. But also, while the regeneration is going on, you have to keep working with your residents to make sure that that area doesn't die in the meantime. So every single one of our residents who wants to stay local gets a new home local. So we have got communities who live together, who continue to live together in the regeneration schemes. So again, building capacity is part of what and parcel of what we think neighbourhood management is about. Keeping things safe, keeping things clean, making sure that residents feel as proud of where they live as their homes. I'm almost thinking that should be a given. That should be the stuff that you should, as residents, be able to take for granted. And I know that you don't, and I know that my residents don't, because we don't always get it right. But it should be the stuff that you don't even have to think about. Certainly it should be what you don't have to fight for. And once you get that in place, then we have started to build on what else brings with it the benefits to our residents as well as a home. So on top of that, and you mentioned youth provision, we've got a huge youth offering. We've got a state-of-the-art Spotlight Youth Centre, which has got everything from music to boxing to we've got a suite of Macs, which I'm old enough not really to know what a Mac is, but apparently it's a really great computer that young people do all sorts of amazing graphics works on in particular. But it's places where people can come together and actually share experience, but also feel safe. So, and you were talking about an area where health had been brought in and had become integral to the offering for an estate. We've got a GP for our young people called Health Spot, and they only see young people through our health service who otherwise there could be concerns. They don't want to talk to their GP. They're worried about mum and dad. And that's all in a very, very regulated space where we try to work with the young person on whatever the issues are, but it's a confidential GP service. Now, we didn't come up with that great idea. The young people at Spotlight came up with that idea. Jobs, skills, volunteering. Again, I suppose I'd put this in the context of we've got 10,000 homes. We are not a huge organisation, and yet we've managed to leverage in enough support that our residents get the benefit from it. So actually, homes is the core. I'm an old school housing manager. So actually for me, I think it was Blair went on about education, education, education. For me, it's homes, homes, homes. If you don't feel safe at home, if you don't have a home that you can afford, then all of the rest of it sort of starts to become a problem for you. It starts to take up energy. It starts to take up your capacity to do anything else if you don't feel safe at home. So again, contribution to neighbourhoods. Now you would have thought, or we would have thought, that given we do so much in the neighbourhood, we would have had a higher score there. But actually, again, that's something that we really need to dig into because it's lower than our satisfaction score. So what is missing from all the things that we currently do in terms of neighbourhood management? All the things that we're trying to do, all the listening that we've done and responding to, what is going to make the difference? And maybe it's nothing. Maybe that group of 14% neutrals are just, everything's all right, we're content, just leave us alone to live our lives. But we need to understand that, because if we don't try to understand that, we end up going backwards or we end up missing something that's going to make the difference. So thank you very much for listening. Sorry if it came across as a bit of a PR exercise for Poplar Harker, but I'm very proud of my team and what we do, very proud of the organisation. So I'm happy to take any questions. Abraham, over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Andrea, never apologise for giving a good presentation, because what it did do is give residents an idea of what good could look like. I'd like to thank Anne and Andrea for sharing both their experience from the early 80s to now, because it's really important, okay, that it's not seen as something that's not been tackled, but I think we all can say that hasn't been tackled with the ferocity and or potential passion, by those that run the country, if I'm, being political as an, so I think that we've still got a lot of work to do as a sector. I think it's really important that residents keep banging the drum and saying to their landlords what's good and what's not so good, but also to hold them account. I would also encourage residents to attend some of the other sessions we've got, because what it does do, it provides you with a rounded approach to how you can work with your landlord to tackle other issues that are linked to neighbourhood management. So, can I thank you for, being present.